All our stories are created for entertainment purposes only.
I'm 30 years old, and my wife is 25 years old. We've been married for 3 years and together for almost 6. We don't have any kids, no significant assets, and we actually have more debt than money in our checking account. We're renting a house, and I'm the one bringing in the primary income, making around $4,000 a month, while she brings in about $1,500. I work really hard to provide her with the kind of life she's used to, but now we're facing a difficult situation. I have a close-knit work group, and I've been playing in a recreational soccer league for 2 years, thanks to an invitation from a coworker I've known for nearly 3 years. My wife used to attend all my soccer games, and I thought it was her way of supporting me. However, deep down, I wondered if she was just there for the alcohol that often came with these games. On game nights, I'd usually drink in moderation, but she, as a spectator, would sometimes overindulge. After the games, our group would often hang out at various places like my house, bars, or pizza joints. A few weeks ago, some of the group decided to meet up at one of the guys' houses in a city quite far from ours. I told them I couldn't make it because I had work early the next morning. However, on the way home, my wife texted one of the guys I considered a friend, asking for a ride to the party. She even asked me if it was okay while I was driving, and I said no because of work and wanting to spend time with her that night. She responded with the silent treatment, fueled by alcohol-induced anger. When we got home, I pulled into our driveway and a car pulled up in front of our house. It was my buddy. My wife had taken the liberty of deciding to go to the party, and I was furious. I went to my friend's car and told him I wasn't okay with this and to leave. However, my wife got out of my car and into his, and they drove away. In my anger, I decided to charge up the unused iPad I had bought for her years ago. I knew that old iPad was linked to her messaging and social media accounts. I saw her location and stayed up until I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m., and she still wasn't home. When I woke up, she was in our bed, but I didn't know when she had returned. That morning, I got ready for work without waking her or giving her a goodbye kiss. It was the first and only time I'd done that. I wanted her to know how angry I was. Before leaving for work, I grabbed the iPad and tossed it into my briefcase. At work, after a meeting and a few phone calls, I took out the iPad and a notification from a messaging app popped up. Buddy is typing. I opened the app and found a shocking exchange of messages. They were supposed to disappear, but it seemed this app version was outdated, so I watched their conversation unfold in real time. They were talking about what had happened the night before, with Buddy mentioning their lovemaking and other guys they had fun with. It was disturbing, but it got even worse. I witnessed my wife instructing Buddy to send her a video of himself doing something disgusting, which he unfortunately did. I couldn't handle it and rushed out of my office to the bathroom where I vomited uncontrollably. I was trembling from what I had just witnessed and asked for permission to leave work for the day. After a few hours of trying to calm down, I was genuinely afraid I might hurt someone or myself. I drove home and found her still asleep in bed. I put my things down and asked her to come downstairs. We sat across from each other, and I asked her to tell me everything about the previous night in detail. She did, but conveniently left out any sensitive moments, only mentioning drinking, playing pool, and talking. I then inquired about when she last talked to Buddy. She claimed they exchanged a few messages that morning, but nothing significant. That's when I dropped the bomb. Would your story change if you knew I watched the entire conversation you had with him this morning? Tears welled up in her eyes, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Are you leaving me?" She came clean and admitted she couldn't remember everything clearly, but she had closeness with Buddy and another teammate the previous night. That's all she could recall, and there might have been more guys involved, but it was hazy. I was utterly repulsed. I asked if this was the first time, and shockingly, she confessed there had been other occasions. One of them even occurred in our house while I was sleeping upstairs. That was the breaking point. I realized how oblivious I had been all along. I helped her pack a bag, and she left to stay with her family. She begged me not to tell anyone. I felt like I was trapped in a horror story all alone. It's now been 2 weeks since D-Day, and I have no clue what to do. I sincerely hope I don't win the award for the worst D-Day experience, but it's hard to imagine anything worse than discovering your wife in such a scenario with guys you had welcomed into your lives. And to learn that this had been happening for months, with at least one of the guys. Now she's trying to blame it all on alcohol and says she wants to start attending AA. She also wants us to go through couples therapy, hoping we can come out of this together. I think it's a bit too late for that, but I'm feeling like a chump grappling with a range of emotions, including guilt for some reason. I don't even know why. I have a meeting with an attorney scheduled for tomorrow. Despite her struggles with alcohol and her desire to work things out, I believe I'm making the right move. I can't talk to her without picturing her in that scenario with those guys. I can't trust her. Her actions disgust me, and I know I deserve better. I'm not perfect, but why do I feel so guilty? Is there any hope of reconciling this? Am I the bad guy here? I'd really appreciate any support or words of wisdom. Writing all this out makes me feel like a fool, but it's not easy to stop caring about someone who blindsided you so completely. Update. It's been nearly a month since I shared my experience. Unfortunately, this situation has gone from bad to unbelievably wicked. A few days after my initial post, I followed your advice and scheduled appointments with some lawyers, as well as one with a legal document preparation expert to explore my options. My wife had no idea about these meetings, just so you know. We went several days with no direct contact after the initial post, but she was insistent that this time she was serious about us seeing a marriage therapist. I had been suggesting it for months before D-Day, hoping we could work through our issues. Deep down, though, I knew what my ultimate decision would be. She did manage to get us an appointment with a therapist, but we had to wait about a week and a half to get in. During that time, I was basically tracking her every move through that cursed iPad. I was obsessively checking everything, monitoring messages on Facebook, Snapchat, and whatever else I could get my eyes on. After a week and a half of scrutinizing her every digital move, I didn't have any more evidence, and I began to think that maybe she was genuinely remorseful. When we finally met the therapist, he asked us why we were there, and I asked my wife to explain the situation in her own words. She left out some details, but most of it came out. The therapist turned to me after hearing her story and asked me how it affected my trust in her and our marriage. I was in disbelief and shock, and instead of answering his question, I said, "If I don't say it out loud right now, I'm afraid I never will. For me, there's no way back from this. The marriage is finished, the vows were broken, my trust is in ruins, and I believe the only thing left to do is get a divorce." It felt like a punch to the gut, and she started crying uncontrollably. I continued, "I don't know if anything can be salvaged from this relationship, but the marriage is over. I meant what I said on our wedding day, and I'm not being true to myself if I don't acknowledge that it's broken beyond repair." At that moment, I felt a bit relieved after expressing my decision out loud in front of her and the neutral therapist. The rest of the therapy session was focused on the therapist explaining to her why my feelings and choice were entirely reasonable given the circumstances, and he tried to calm her down. Honestly, it couldn't have gone any better in my opinion. The therapist suggested that he would see us individually, not as a couple, to help us as individuals first. Maybe down the road, years from now, there might be a chance for us to discuss reconciliation, but let me clarify that I have no intention of considering reconciliation at this point. However, individual therapy could be beneficial for me in the meantime. Before I continue, I knew that I was about to embark on a legal journey. If things don't go smoothly, it could get really messy and financially devastating for me, especially since I'm the breadwinner in a no-fault state. I've documented the legal process, but I won't share it until everything is finalized. It's too risky to post online right now. The key point in this legal process is that I need to maintain an amicable relationship for the time being. Let's skip ahead about a week and a half. By now, both of us have had individual therapy sessions, and she's telling her family that we're ending the marriage due to broken vows, but we're both focused on healing ourselves right now. She's still staying with her family, and I continue my habit of constantly checking her digital presence for any signs that she might be continuing her unhealthy habits, as some of you had suggested she might. I'm not blaming you. I would have been checking anyway. It wasn't until one night last week that I realized there was one place I hadn't looked yet: the App Store. I checked the app download history of the iCloud account and discovered that almost 2 weeks prior to that evening, she had downloaded a secret texting app onto her phone. I suddenly realized that all this time, she had gone to great lengths to hide some form of messaging from me, even though she knew I had her iPad. She insisted that I keep it to rebuild trust, but I don't think she realized that any apps downloaded on one iCloud-connected device could be seen in the history from any other connected device. I had to find out what kind of conversations were happening in that app. I was almost acting on autopilot, not fully in control of my own body during those moments. I downloaded the app onto my iPad, tried a few of her most common login combinations, and there it was, the ugly truth. Not only had she been messaging Buddy on this app since after our first therapy appointment together, but they had been continuing their physical relationship, even during times when she knew I'd be away. It was too much to handle. I vomited and broke down in tears. It was 3 a.m. on a weeknight. I rushed into the bathroom and started grabbing all the prescription strength medications I could find. I went back into my room, clutching a handful of assorted pills that I knew could end my life. I sat on the edge of my bed sobbing, ready to give up. I picked up my phone and desperately tried to call my mom, but she didn't answer. Then I dialed my dad, but he didn't pick up either. Finally, my sister answered. I managed to tell her what I had just discovered amidst uncontrollable tears, and she could sense I was on the brink of losing it. She didn't know about the pills in my hand, but she insisted on keeping me on the phone, even though it was the middle of the night. It took about an hour, but eventually I began to numb down. After hanging up the phone, I went back into the bathroom and emptied the pills back into one of the bottles. I washed my hands, then returned to bed, hoping to get at least a couple of hours of sleep, but it never came. As the hours passed, I realized that I couldn't stay in that house or in that moment any longer. I knew I had to go to work, as painful as it would be. I quickly got dressed, tossing the pill bottle into my briefcase along with the iPad. Once I arrived at my office, I handed both to my most trusted coworker and asked him to lock them up in his desk, not to return them to me under any circumstances, no questions asked. He nodded in understanding and gave me a comforting pat on the shoulder as I walked away. So I've finally done it. I got what I'd been searching for all along. Undeniable proof that my wife not only cheated on me, but also lied about it without a shred of remorse. I spent days wrestling with what to do with this newfound information. On one hand, I had a burning desire to expose her to every family member, friend, or acquaintance to reveal her true colors and her ongoing betrayal. But I couldn't act recklessly. The divorce process was already in motion, and there was still a window of time where things could get ugly and expensive. As days passed, her attempts to reach out to me through texts and calls went unanswered. Eventually, she decided to pay me a visit to check on me. I was on edge during the encounter, intentionally vague and seemingly indifferent to her presence. I didn't know how to approach the situation. It wasn't until she lost her temper and began yelling at me for acting strangely that I finally confronted her directly. I asked her point blank, "Have you had any contact with Buddy since that night?" Her immediate response was, "No, I blocked him on everything." I pressed further, asking if she was absolutely sure about it. She vehemently declared that she hadn't, and that Buddy was repulsive, insisting she would never betray me like that. Then came the bombshell. I mentioned the app and the video I had on my phone, showing the conversations they'd been having, the photos exchanged, and their plans to sneak around based on my daily schedule. She collapsed to the ground, sobbing and begging. Though I couldn't discern the reason for her desperation, my tone remained indifferent as I laid out the facts. I won't spill the beans to anyone about this situation, but in return, you've got to agree not to put up a fight during the divorce process. I'll be fair, even though I shouldn't have to be, but if you let the cat out of the bag, then all bets are off, and you'll face the divorce process head on. I'll still aim to be fair, though it's not something I should be doing in the first place. The choice is yours. After our conversation, she left, and 2 days later, she got served with the divorce papers. Since that day, I've stuck to my word and haven't spilled the beans to anyone beyond my immediate family. However, I've noticed through the Find My iPhone app that she's been visiting the same house every single night, where he lives with his mother. Her family believes she's attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings every night, but my location screenshots tell a different story. Seriously, why hasn't she changed her iCloud password? I'm not sure why I keep gathering evidence, but I do. Right now, I'm wrestling with anxiety as I wait for this period to pass until she loses the right to fight me in court. All the while, her family thinks she's on the road to recovery, when in reality, she's lying to every single one of them. What's hurting me the most at the moment is the sheer injustice of it all. She gets to be around people, including her family, pretending like everything is fine every day while sneaking off each night to be with him and then coming home in the dead of night to keep up appearances. Update. I'm chiming back in now because my divorce is finally official. No need to hide out anymore after enduring the absurdly long 6-month and 1-day cooling off period to see if my ex-wife would change her story without my knowledge. It's over. I've gone completely no contact, and I finally feel like I can start moving forward with my life. Many of you followed my first 2 posts right after D-Day, as insane and grotesque as they were. I should have known that the rest of the cooling off period would be just as crazy, so I thought I'd share an update on what has happened since my last post. My last post was 6 weeks after D-Day, and what I didn't mention was that I had already filed the divorce papers with the county to kickstart the process. I took the advice of many kind Redditors who suggested giving her back the iPad and cutting ties with any devices or accounts that would let me obsess over what she was doing. I knew enough. I knew what I wanted. Out. My approach to the divorce process might have taken more of an emotional toll in the long run, but it didn't hit my wallet as hard in the long term. It all made sense to me at the time, even though it was moving at an agonizingly slow pace. Once I realized I could never trust this woman again, I knew I had to get rid of her, but I wasn't going to pay her month after month, especially considering we didn't have children together. My state's no-fault divorce system had me scratching my head because I was the breadwinner. There was no way I was going to fork over roughly $2,000 a month in spousal support for what she had put me through. So I got angry, thought it through, and came up with a plan to end this marriage and get away from her as quickly and completely as possible. Looking back, I'm not proud of some of the tactics I used in my divorce, but it ultimately worked out. However, I do feel like my integrity or moral high ground may have taken a hit along the way. Well, it's a matter of perspective, I guess. In my view, my actions were minor compared to the enormous amounts of mistrust, pain, and suffering she put me through. At around the same time as my last post, I already had the divorce papers drafted and submitted to the county, but I was waiting for their confirmation. I didn't let my wife know about this because she had been living with her family ever since I first asked her to leave my home. I had set up a few meetings with her to talk. I wanted to make her believe, even though it was a complete lie, that I still wanted to try and save our relationship. In all our discussions, I made it clear that in my mind our marriage was over. The vows were broken. If we were to start anew, we'd have to mutually end this marriage, then begin dating again, like courting each other and forging a new, stronger relationship. It's hard to believe she bought into this idea, but she did. In fact, I planned to make the process as easy and painless as possible for her to speed things along and keep it private so we could focus on moving forward. A good example of this was how I had her served with the divorce papers. We had a mutual friend come to my house, the same house we had lived in together, to act as a middleman. We exchanged signatures and had a conversation. She signed the necessary papers without even going through them carefully. I doubt she ever really looked into the nitty-gritty details of those tedious legal forms because I painted a rosy picture, leaving out any mention of spousal support beyond splitting our current account. Avoiding paying her spousal support was my top priority in all of this. During the first few months, I tried hard to play the "I need time on my own to think" card, but I still met with her about 2 times a month. We'd have dinner or meet up in public places, making small talk and pretending like I cared. Our meetings always took place in public to ensure she couldn't accuse me of any wrongdoing. I maintained a facade, played along, and made her believe I was genuinely processing my emotions, trying to forgive and possibly reconcile, even though I had no intention of doing so. By keeping her on the hook, I managed to remove her from my bank accounts. With her cooperation, had her taken off the lease and moved all her belongings into a storage unit. I convinced her that we'd find a new place together after all was said and done, claiming it would help me heal if her stuff was out of the house. Deceiving her and keeping her in this state of cooperation made the challenging tasks of separation remarkably easy, and she genuinely thought she was doing what was best for us. This strategy got me through about 4 of the 6 months I needed to endure until I reached the light at the end of the tunnel. Around the start of the 4th month, I received a text from a family member she was staying with, asking if we were still working things out. This family member knew about Buddy and the truth, but to maintain my facade of reconciliation, I replied with a yes. Why? In response, I received a picture of my wife and Buddy having dinner at a restaurant in another city, along with a text saying this was happening right then. It turned out that this family member was meeting colleagues for drinks after work and spotted them together. This is where I messed up big time by letting my emotions take over. I immediately texted my wife, asking if we could talk on the phone. She lied, claiming she was in an AA meeting and would call me afterward. That's when I lost my cool and replied, saying I didn't know they held AA meetings at the restaurant and that Buddy was her sponsor now. She called me right away, yelling at me and accusing me of stalking her. I responded with some not-so-friendly words, calling her names and making it clear that I had no interest in ever speaking to her again. As a result, the last 2 months of the divorce saw her in a relationship with Buddy, initially private but eventually made public. I had blocked them both on all social media, but information still trickled in through mutual friends, and people started reaching out to me, wanting to know what was happening. My wife was getting bolder, posting updates and photos of the two of them together. When people asked me, I would tell them as much as they wanted to know. I needed to get our mutual friends on my side, the ones I valued and wanted to keep. It didn't take much, just telling them the truth, and having their support meant more to me than the material aspects of the divorce. Finally, I had people to vent to, and I vented a lot. Most of the people I talked to had also spoken with her, trying to find out who this guy was in the photos. What I heard from them was that she downplayed the events that had happened. While she didn't deny that she cheated, she left out many details, which I was more than happy to fill them in on. Our friends and her close relatives were in shock, and they chose to support me. I asked them not to confront her until the divorce was finalized. As time passed and they continued to be together, their relationship became more public, and I kept getting calls and updates. It got to the point where I had to ask people to stop telling me about their developments because it was causing me a lot of emotional pain. Just a few days before the divorce was finalized, on Valentine's Day, I received 3 screenshots from different people, all showing the same social media post of the two of them hugging, accompanied by a romantic description about how wonderful this man was in her life. She even mentioned hoping to marry him someday. You know that saying, when one door closes, another one opens? Well, I couldn't help but chuckle at the puzzled comments from distant family members and her friends who barely knew me. Some of them even used shocked emojis. I'd like to say it doesn't bother me seeing them together, but deep down, it does. There's still this lingering feeling of loss, but now I also have this overwhelming sense of disgust and regret for ever being involved with this woman who turned out to be so ridiculous, heartless, and grotesque. It makes me sick to think I couldn't see this monster in front of me all those years. And don't get me started on Buddy. I've got no respect or energy left to comment on that guy. He's in for a world of hurt sticking around with her, my ex-wife, someone I feel like I don't even know anymore, which weirdly makes it a bit easier for me to move forward. Finally, the day arrived last week when the court finalized the dissolution of our marriage. I never received any papers, and her chance to fight me for anything we hadn't agreed on in our previous drafts had passed. I managed to keep my entire $401K, avoid spousal support, additional debt in my name, lawyers, court appearances, or ever having to deal with her again. At the end of that day, I blocked her number from my cell phone. The very next day, 7 of my closest friends, 6 of whom were friends with both of us, threw a divorce party for me. They documented the whole thing on Snapchat throughout the night, and it was a celebration worth sharing. Each of them earned a solid social media block from my ex-wife and a few not-so-nice texts from her. Even her maid of honor attended my divorce party and wants nothing to do with her anymore. While I was digging through her digital tracks, I discovered that she had been sleeping with a guy from her hometown while all of this chaos was going on. Here's the deal. This guy she's involved with is an old flame of hers, but he's got a wife and a kid back at home. I'm torn about whether I should find a way to let his wife know. I feel guilty for not saying anything up to this point, but the idea of wrecking another family and carrying that burden on my conscience is something I can't quite justify. Should I reach out to her? Do I reveal my identity? Or do I just keep this to myself? This situation is like a constant nagging thought in my mind, making me feel sick, anxious, and even giving me occasional nightmares. I'd appreciate any advice you've got to offer, considering all the factors. Update. In just 17 days, it'll mark the 2nd anniversary of my D-Day. Honestly, looking back at the previous posts I wrote, I never imagined I'd make it this far. In terms of the time that's passed and the healing from the pain, burden, hurt, and depression caused by my ex-wife's horrific actions. Many of you kind folks have reached out asking for an update, and all I can say is, be careful what you wish for. Hopefully, this will be my last update about what's happened since the divorce was finalized. In case you're just jumping into this conversation, here's some light reading to catch you up on the situation. If you enjoy being shocked, flabbergasted, appalled, or left speechless, read the post below first before you continue. Obviously, it's been quite a while since my last update, but some significant events have unfolded that truly illustrate how terrible a person can be. After the divorce was officially done in February 2019, I tried my best to go no contact, but that's not always easy these days. I didn't actually talk to her or anything like that, but every now and then, I might come across a post from a distant family member of hers that I hadn't blocked yet, or a friend might accidentally mention something they saw on a mutual friend's Snapchat, things like that. My true friends did their best to spare me from these kinds of updates, but some news was just too big to keep to themselves. The first bombshell dropped in May of 2019 when one of my closest friends called to spill the beans. My ex-wife was tying the knot with a guy from Tennessee. Wait, what? Yep, it was for real. My friend's husband hadn't blocked my ex-wife on Facebook yet, and he managed to snap some screenshots of the whole lead-up to this big revelation. Keep in mind, this saga unfolded between March and July of 2019. Apparently, Buddy Inter didn't stick around for long after our divorce was finalized. I don't have all the details on that or how it ended, but honestly, it's not too surprising. Starting in April, her Facebook status updates hinted at everything happening for a reason, dropping subtle clues that she was falling for someone new. Poor soul. Then, out of the blue in July, a simple picture and caption popped up on her Facebook wall. The photo showed her and some random dude, none of us knew who he was, standing in a courthouse, holding hands, wearing rings, and proudly displaying what looked like a marriage certificate. The location tag said California, and she'd updated her last name with a caption that went something like, "Excited to start the rest of my life with such an amazing man, feeling so blessed. Look out, Tennessee, here we come." Dramatic pause here. I know this entire story, all the way back to my first post, might sound unbelievable, but I have no other proof than my word. Some of you might drop off here, but if you've stuck around this long, I hope you trust me. I just couldn't resist the intense curiosity surrounding the situation. So I reached out to one of my ex-wife's cousin-in-laws, someone I got along with pretty well, to get the whole story. He was willing to spill the beans. Turns out, her new husband was a guy she'd met online, and they'd been talking for a few months over the phone, via text and so on. Apparently, they both fell head over heels for each other, and he proposed to her during a phone call. She said yes, and they just couldn't wait. Within a week of the proposal, and despite her best efforts to inform her family and invite them to the wedding, which took place in some random town about 2 hours away from our hometown for reasons unknown, he flew out to California, and they got married on a Saturday. Remarkably, that was the first time they'd ever met face-to-face, but they were now husband and wife. The real kicker, as per her cousin, is that not a single member of her family attended the courthouse wedding. Whether it was due to a lack of time to plan or just a lack of respect to attend, they got married in a pretty unceremonious way, something that I'm sure would have really bothered her. The following Sunday was spent packing up a moving truck with all her stuff, and on Monday, they headed east for Tennessee. I couldn't believe it. I've heard the story from enough people by now to know it's true, but back then, it was just mind-boggling. I feel for that poor guy. If only he knew. I'm sure if he did know, he wouldn't have chosen to get married in California, a no-fault state, where he could end up in the same situation I was dealing with. Hopefully, it's more about him not being informed, rather than making a dumb decision. For a while, I did my best to push thoughts of the two of them out of my mind. But I did find some comfort in knowing they were moving far, far away, so there was no chance of randomly bumping into them again. Summer came and went in 2019, but right in the middle of fall, another bombshell hit. While scrolling through Instagram, a video popped up on my screen showing my ex-wife holding a plate in front of her father, with him covering his eyes with his hands. Before I could even comprehend what was happening, I saw a single cookie on the plate, covered in blue frosting. My ex-wife's voice counted down. 3, 2, 1, it's a boy! As her father uncovered his eyes. It was a gender reveal video? Why was I seeing this? Her mother had just created a public Instagram account and posted this video of her husband's excitement. Apparently, Instagram's algorithm thought I'd be interested. I completely lost it. Those were some really rough days and sleepless nights. The emotions I felt were a mix of disgust, pain, frustration, and even a hint of jealousy. Becoming a father is one of my big dreams in life, and if all this hadn't happened, on our original timeline, this could have been the time we were expecting a child together. It could have been my child. I could have been the one about to become a father. I'm 32 years old now. Honestly, I thought I'd be a father by this age, or at least on the path to a serious relationship, if not with a child on the way. I consider myself a mature man, and I understand that I still have time ahead of me to achieve my dream of starting a family with someone I love and am happy with. But I can't help but compare where I am in life to where I thought I'd be by now. What I can say for sure is that in this particular situation, I'd much rather be in my position than the soon-to-be fathers. I can only imagine that by now, the baby is probably already born. Luckily, I haven't heard any news either way, and I think that's a better position to be in than knowing for certain. But every now and then, I can't help but wonder. The good news is that when I really think about it, there are more and more days now when she and her chaotic life don't even cross my mind, and I consider that progress. Of course, there are still bad days, and with the stay-at-home orders, those bad days can become unbearably depressing. I'm fortunate to currently work as an independent contractor, which allows me to work from home on my computer, but these days can be quite lonely. I make an effort to get out and go for walks, but I really miss going to the gym. I've also visited my parents as much as I can, just to have some company that isn't from a webinar or a phone call. I understand that we're all going through this challenging situation together, and I'm not alone in this. When I start feeling hopeless, I remind myself of the early days following my D-Day and how I thought I'd never make it through, yet here I am, standing strong. I know I'll get through this difficult time as well, one day at a time, one moment at a time if necessary. Time keeps moving forward even if it feels agonizingly slow. Update time! It's been 3 years since D-Day, and it's been over a year since I last posted here. This past year has been a turning point for me, finally allowing me to focus on myself. I don't have any updates on my ex-wife or her situation because I've gone completely no contact with her and her entire family across all forms of communication. I've even had to mute or block mutual friends where I thought unwanted information might slip through. I knew from past experience that keeping anything related to her or her family off my radar was the best way to move forward and not get stuck dwelling on the past. Going no contact with her family was particularly tough because they were my family too, right up until she made her choices. I had deep bonds with some of them, almost like blood relatives. Accepting the loss of those relationships was a hard and unfair reality, but it was necessary. This strategy is working for me because as time passes, there are more and more days where I don't think about her at all, compared to the days when she does cross my mind. And even when I do think about her, it's more of a thank goodness I avoided that mess feeling, rather than one of sorrow or pain. During the past year, amid the pandemic, I made a bold career change. I started my own independent consulting business, specializing in tech support and IT system design. It was a leap of faith, but it quickly paid off. I landed a few contracts, including 2 with local government organizations, both of which have been renewed for another 12 months with no signs of slowing down. Working for myself and having the freedom to make such a significant career shift, with only my own success riding on it, has been exhilarating. I take immense pride in the work I deliver to my clients, and this sense of self-worth has made a huge difference in how I view the past. I'm no longer constantly worried about the present or the future. My work life is going great. My finances are in the best shape ever. My mind is mostly free from those haunting memories. My body is in better shape than it's been since all of this started, and I'm feeling pretty good about myself as a man. But there's one area that concerns me a bit, and that's my lack of trust in people, especially when it comes to women in a romantic sense. My overall lack of trust in people actually made leaving my job an easy decision and starting my own business a no-brainer. I don't have to rely on anyone but myself to get the job done, and I always make sure it gets done. However, when it comes to romance, I've noticed that my desire to be with someone has significantly diminished. I'm perfectly fine being on my own, and my brief foray into online dating showed me that it's often a pool of people with their own issues. I came to this conclusion after going on 3 or 4 dates about a year ago, and they were all pretty underwhelming experiences. These women didn't seem to be looking for something substantial, despite what their dating profiles suggested. Instead, they seemed more interested in getting attention from the men they were talking to or meeting. It felt like they were playing the field, and I didn't want to be a part of that. I want to clarify that I'm not trying to disrespect anyone, and I'm not embracing any extreme ideologies. There's a significant part of me that still yearns for that deep connection and intimacy. I truly desire to share my life with someone special. But just because I feel that way doesn't mean I'll let just anyone into my life just to avoid being alone. I'm willing to be patient, put in the necessary effort to keep my life on the right track, and remain open to the possibility of finding love again in the future. There's this annoying inner dialogue that keeps reminding me I'm 34 years old, and I should have had a wife and kids by now, living the happy life my friends seem to have, paying mortgages, going on trips, and enjoying their children. What do I have? Money in the bank? Does that really make life better? I acknowledge that I need to continue working on this aspect of myself, but I understand that imposing some arbitrary timeline in my head isn't the solution. Right now, I'm grateful for the life I have, thankful I'm no longer tied to my ex-wife, and hopeful that by prioritizing myself and making the most of each day, I'll be able to look back and say I'm proud of who I've become, despite the challenging start I had.